Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Jack Threlfall Show. This is the interview segment for this week's episode, and we are joined by a very, very special guest, Tom Gaymor. Welcome back to the show, Tom.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think I'm right in saying I'm the first guest to return.
Absolutely. Popular guest, and after a very, very busy weekend with the IndyCar and the Indy 500 race, it'd be great to have you back on to talk over it all. So, as a weekend, as a race, what were the main headlines for you, and how was it commentating the Indy 500 this year?
Yeah, I think, the Indy 500, it's special. It's a bit like the Super Bowl. It's not just one day. It's the whole month of May and that build up. It's a crescendo into the pomp and ceremony before the race. 325,000 people crammed into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and just that build up. So many unknowns around what happens in practice to qualifying weekend where they turn the boost up. Then, of course, the boost comes back down for carb day. The weather was really inclement for carb day this year, so we didn't really know what the mileage was going to be like in terms of fuel mileage for the Honda versus Chevrolet battle. We knew that Chip Ganassi were going to be really strong because of their practice pace. Ed Carpenter always brings a really strong car for qualifying. Could they convert that into the race? Question marks around Arrow McLaren SP. Can they convert their qualifying pace? Because don't forget, they were really strong in qualifying at Texas earlier on in the year and then faded in the race. Would the likes of Andretti and Team Penske come through? And so with all of that in mind, and then just the gravitas of the occasion, my first time leading for the Indy 500 by Sports F1, and to have two wonderful guests in Max Chilton and Andy Vanderberg, it was a magical experience, a magical month, a magical build-up, and the race didn't disappoint. There was everything that you'd expect from an Indy 500. You had the big crashes. It's obviously a dangerous affair doing 230 miles an hour for 200 laps with 33 cars on track, and a little twist at the end, a few banana skins. I used the term snakes and ladders in terms of the strategy and banana skins that come the way of certain drivers. Look at Palou and Scott Dixon, so close but yet so far.
Absolutely.
And Ericsson didn't melt at the end. I thought he was going to be under huge pressure with Pato trying to go around the outside into turn one, and no one had really made it too wide there at racing speeds. We saw obviously the second lane in turn one during the restarts, but certainly not with the tyre life the way it was. Don't forget, at the end of the race there, those Firestone tyres were absolutely shot, and all of the accidents happened towards the end of the stint life on those tyres. So not up to race temperature, no rubber left. I think Pato O'Ward definitely made the right choice in terms of backing out, because that was only ever going one way. I think TK and Felix Rosenquist were licking their lips in third and fourth, because the Indy 500 was almost coming their way if those two had gone through turn one side by side. So I don't think Ericsson was going to lift, and I think they would have both ended up in the fence, if I'm honest.
Absolutely. It seemed like there was so much going into that final run that O'Ward had. So much. You spoke about the preparation that goes into a weekend. You don't qualify the day before like a Grand Prix. It's a whole event that takes place really throughout the entire month of May. The focus of these IndyCar teams is on the Indy 500, and it stands out kind of at the top of their calendar. You spoke about how the teams prepare for the Indy 500. As a member of the broadcast team, what was your approach to preparing for an event like that? Your debut as the lead commentator for such a big event. And I think it was also such a big event for Sky, for IndyCar in the UK. So what was your preparation like on that side?
First and foremost, enjoy it. That's the advice I give everyone else. It's the hardest thing to do when you're focused on outcome, worrying about performance, that kind of thing. Doesn't matter if you're an athlete, doesn't matter if you're in the business environment, delivering a presentation, or you're a presenter. It comes with pressure, and if you can't enjoy it, then you don't come across as relaxed or the best version of yourself. So first and foremost, enjoy it and try and be relaxed and take it in your stride. Remember it for what it is, and that's a wonderful opportunity and an experience that anybody would jump at. And so that's very much where my head's at. And then there's a lot of work. It's like doing an exam. I say to my wife, every time I'm commentating or presenting, the build up, that she sees the preparation and the endeavor throughout the week. It's a lot of revision. It's a lot of writing notes. It's informally being across every single news story, just not switching off. You're just filling in terms of trying to get as much information into your head as possible. So when you do go on air, you're across absolutely everything, and you're as best informed as you can be, and you can try and get that information out across to the viewers and hope that they enjoy the experience.
And as part of that broadcast in the build-up you spoke about, something that I'm sure a big part of that research and preparation was devoted to was your interview piece with Zak Brown, and with their investment as McLaren, Arrow McLaren SP, that IndyCar team kind of growing and rising up the ranks of the teams with two really strong drivers this year. In interviewing Zak, how did you apply that kind of framing of preparation and research, that as a kind of task? How did you approach that?
So first and foremost, an absolute honour and a privilege to interview Zak Brown, one of the figureheads in the sport and doing wonderful things at McLaren, not just in Formula One, but stateside as well, and in terms of the business. And so you've got to almost park the sort of gravitas of the occasion and just imagine that you're sitting down in a coffee shop or a pub or wherever you are and just trying to have that sort of relaxed and informal conversation. Zak is super polished and brilliant when it comes to his media commitments. So he's a wonderful talker. He comes across really well. He shares a lot of information. He's got a wonderful manner about him. So he's a joy to interview in terms of when you ask him a question, he's going to talk and talk and talk. And that's brilliant. He's very polished. He knows what he wants to say before you've asked the question. So you've always got to bear that in mind to stay on track. And whatever question you're going to ask him, he's going to stay true to whatever it is he wants to say. So you got to be quite formal in that respect. But I think we got some good points across. Whenever you do an interview like that, you've almost got to run through the questions that you're going to present, just so McLaren and Zak are prepared, but also happy with the information share and the tone and how it is that and what it is that you want to get out of the interview. So you stick to that and you prepare in that way. And I thought the end product was quite good. We got one or two exclusives there, 3 cars for 2023, and Alexander Rossi's fast becoming the worst kept secret in the IndyCar paddock in terms of where he's going next year. So it was a great afternoon, a great day out at McLaren, a wonderful venue to do an interview at, and yeah, it was great to sit down with Zak, and I thought it paved the way into our Indy 500 coverage quite well.
Because it felt like it was really important for that broadcast for people watching IndyCar for the first time, and to be so involved as the lead presenter, lead commentator for you in bringing new audiences to IndyCar and kind of breaking down a sport that to some extent can be quite simple. It's a car race, just trying to win it. But there are so many layers to the strategy and differences and similarities to Formula One. And I think, Zak as a figure really does kind of bridge those two. You mentioned there's an element of like media training and kind of approval from McLaren that goes into it. Do you feel like there's an attempt to overcome people's media training when you're interviewing them? You want the real answers, not just what the rehearsed ones have been. How do you feel that element plays out in motorsport interviews?
You know what? I think it all boils down to trust. So it's about making sure that they feel comfortable and that you're building an element of trust, A, in the short term, but B, also in the long term. And that is very important. There's a lot of conversation and a lot of information that goes on behind the scenes that you might be holding that you might not necessarily be able to talk about. And there's certain people that can't wait to get that information out there. They tend not to get trusted with information in the future, and it's about what you do with that information, and how we've all got to work together to bring that information to the forefront at the right time, because it's sensitive for a reason, and everything has to fall into place like a giant jigsaw puzzle. So when drivers are being announced, there's an order and there's a reason, and a lot of it's based on commercials and various different things. And if you go out there and fire the cannon in early, then you're not going to get trusted. So that side of things, it's not so much overcoming their media training, but it's about earning trust. And I think that's been the biggest lesson for me, making sure people can trust you with the information that they have. And your time will come when it comes to exclusives and when it comes to announcing things.
Because it seems like in the long run, it will play out in your favor to be in that sort of liminal space between, you're not just letting them follow their rehearsed answers. You're kind of asking them about things maybe they haven't considered before, or things that aren't just going to be perfectly rehearsed answers. But you can't go too far the other way in trying to search for, quick, snappy headlines or taking quotes out of context or things like that, which is realistically something that does play a big part in sports media, especially beyond F1. Something like football, it's really taken to the extreme, especially in the UK. I wanted to ask about, in our last interview, we spoke a lot about endurance racing as a style, both for driving and for commentary. In the context of the Indy 500, do you view it as an endurance race, and why?
Well, it's 500 miles, so the Americans certainly view it as an endurance race. Just because of the sheer length of the event, and with the build-up and everything else. I mean, we were on air for almost 6 hours, which just showcases how long the event is. I mean, the last two 500s have been the quickest two 500s in history. So that's something to talk about for various different reasons. It's obviously nowhere near as long as some of the events that we see in the World Endurance Calendar or Le Mans or things like that. But it's certainly a long event, and the Americans do view 500 miles as an iconic sort of blue ribbon event, if you like. If you look at some of the other motorsport events that they have, the 500, the Brickyard and Daytona and various different things.
And on the broadcast of the 500s, your driver guest, Max Chilton, a lot of the things he spoke about were about keeping your mentality in check, keeping your focus throughout such a long race distance, so many yellow flags and restarts and pit stops, so much to pay attention to. As a commentator, do you feel a similar thing with such a long broadcast, trying to keep, focused only on the next maybe 15, 20 minutes of broadcast, knowing just confidently what you're going to say and how to lead it? But did you feel an element of endurance on the broadcast, or is that, just something I'm making up?
No, you don't want to. You want to keep your powder dry, that's for sure, because it's a long old broadcast. And the way it plays out, because we're essentially filling the NBC breaks, we don't know. We got a rough idea, a running order as to where they're going to go. So they're going to go 7 pre-race breaks. I think it was 19 breaks in the race, 5 post-race. But that quickly gets ripped up, and the breaks come fast. And it's fast and furious in terms of how quickly the breaks come. Certainly under cautions, you probably would have noticed we'll be talking, hand back to the Americans, and then they'll very quickly go, because they're trying to get as many breaks out under the cautions as possible to not miss the green flag action. So for us, it's just a case of, wow, cleared that break, relaxed. No, we're back on, and so you've got to think on your feet and best laid plans and all that. There's so many breaks to fill. You've got to almost in your mind not try and follow that plan, because you will panic when you go away from the plan. So if you're to the letter, you then, when the unknown comes, you start to get a bit flustered. Whereas if you expect the unknown at any moment, which is very much what it's like filling for the NBC coverage and doing what we do, then you can be a bit more ad hoc and you can be a bit more fluid. And we just do the best we can and try and go with the rhythm or whatever it is that the story line is for that moment. And also we look at social media, we try and bring in bits of information where we can, and I thought Max was fantastic for that, and obviously Andy did a great job as well.
And so much of a part of that broadcast experience and delivering, a great broadcast product over such a long time window happens behind the camera and with the production team. What was the experience like collaborating with Sky as they look to further their investment in the IndyCar series and grow its following in the UK?
Yeah, I think everybody at Sky did a fantastic job. There's a chap called Neil Wooding, who is an AP at Sky Sports F1, who his knowledge and passion for motorsport is second to none. He does so many wonderful features for the Sky Sports F1 channel. And he's passionate about IndyCar, and he's very much the captain of the ship. He drives it forward. He's banging the drum constantly. Billy McGinty, who is at the helm for Sky Sports F1, sees the value in IndyCar. He's been super supportive. There's a real momentum building at Sky Sports F1 in terms of the IndyCar coverage, but certainly couldn't do it without Billy's blessing and certainly Neil's endeavour. We had Tim directing for the weekend for the Indy 500. He's very much a motorsport man. He's done Sky Sports F1, the Grand Prix for years and years and years. He does their golf as well. One of the more senior directors at Sky, and putting those sort of people together, and all the people that worked in the studio on the sound, that kind of stuff in the gallery. We had a wonderful team, and everyone. I was speaking to someone yesterday who was in the gallery. Obviously, I'm in the studio. I'm not a part of that, but everyone there was on the edge of their seat. They were standing up, and when Ericsson was weaving and Pato was going for the outside, people were cheering, and that sort of that comes across when you go into the gallery and you start your day at midday, and having people that are passionate about the event and what it is you're doing and getting really into it and loving it. And certainly for one or two, certainly in the studio on the cameras and so forth, it was their first Indy 500 as well. And they were loving it. And you could really feel the enjoyment and the passion and shining through. And like I said, that was underpinned by a lot of experience and endeavour from those that really brought the broadcast to life and worked really hard throughout the last couple of months to make sure that we had the studio on air and everything worked seamlessly.
And it was really brilliant for me, and I think everyone else who are kind of relatively new IndyCar fans, or also, as you mentioned, people watching it for the first time, to see that investment and the quality of the production really showed there. And I think also, you spoke about having, a motivated team who each have passion for what they do in producing a great product. It feels like to some extent you could extend that to a race team, right? And to have everyone working together in their different roles, and especially someone like Zak in his leadership at McLaren as I guess he's the CEO, right? He's not the team principal, but he's sort of the key motivating figure, at least for the McLaren business. Emphasizing that passion and everyone having their role to contribute seems like a big player or a big kind of determining factor behind his success at McLaren and being able to recover that team. Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think like there are similarities to be drawn there?
Zak's a wonderful leader. He's very strong on the commercial side. He also trusts those around him, and that's the important aspect of leadership. It's not just about doing it your way. It's about having trust in those around you to take it in their direction. So obviously he's got Andreas at Formula One, and he's got Taylor Carl at IndyCar at Arrow McLaren SP, and they're very much his generals, and they take the team in the direction and with with their vision, if you like. So Zak knows his place, and he's a really good leader, and he he trusts in those around him, and then that allows him to focus on his deliverables as well. And if you look at the atmosphere at McLaren, it's a good atmosphere. The smiles on the faces when Pato came second, and the hugs and everything that's going on. You look at the enjoyment that Lando's having at McLaren. It's not quite going Danny Rick's way at the moment, but
I was going to say, yeah, it's not a perfect world. It's probably never going to be a perfect environment. You can't have everything in the right place at the right time in Formula One. There's always going to be something to mess you up. But it's almost as good as it could be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's less about the team and more just about the fact that Danny's up against it. And this is not talked about enough, how good Lando is. I bumped into a few of his engineers when I was doing the Zak interview, people that I knew from Carlin when I was going
to ask about that. When you go and speak to Zak, and with Herta as well, right, from the Carlin days, I would be saying to Zak, you're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's people that were working with Colton and Lando when they were doing F4 at Carlin that are now working for the F1 team and working with Lando now. And they don't need a second invitation just to emphasize how good Lando is. I mean, we're talking, very, very good, in the sense that you've got Max and Charles Leclerc at the front of the field, but make no mistake, if Lando and the McLaren can push up, or if there was equal equipment, Lando's every bit as good, if not better. And that's not being talked enough about. Talking too much about what Daniel's doing wrong as opposed to greatness. I think we're witnessing greatness when it comes to Lando, in the same way that when we talk about Charles Leclerc or Max or whoever it is, we talk about greatness. Lando's in that bracket.
It's a fascinating class of young drivers at the moment in Formula One. The standard of the quality is just so high. But I wanted to touch back on the Indy 500 in a bit more detail as a race. If we start from the start, it's crazy to look back on now Scott Dixon on pole, leading them around that lap, and the way his race eventually unfolded. What was it like in the booth, kind of looking over the start of the race, and for viewers watching it for the first time, what's the start of an Indy 500 like?
I think with 325,000 people in the grandstands and the atmosphere and the snake pit and the sweltering temperatures and the sunshine, it looked fabulous, didn't it? And the pomp and the ceremony and the way that the Americans push these races off, whether or not it's the Super Bowl or it's the Indy 500 or whatever it is, it's really special. And if that doesn't make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, you're watching the wrong thing. And so that was fairly magical. It was nice to see Scott have a playmate. So he had Alex Palou up there. He's not had that in years gone by. And we've sort of always talked about how difficult it is to win a 500 by yourself. And he's had to work with other people and do various different things. But he had Palou there, and he could share he didn't have to push the air at the front. He could sort of help his fuel mileage with swapping the two cars, and it looked really good up until that catastrophe with I think it was Renus VK, wasn't it, the first crash, and just how unlucky that was for Alex Palou. And it nearly happened to Scott later on in the race, where he was running out of fuel, and luckily they opened the pits just in time, and that was the challenge for Palou, is they just didn't have they didn't have the fuel to get round another lap. It was only another lap or two that they needed before they opened the pit lane, and he just didn't have it. And so once Palou disappeared, we'd lost two of the big hitters in the first sort of 20% of the race. So it was always then going to be really interesting to see what happened. And TK looked really aggressive, but just couldn't quite push his way to the front with the way things went, and cautions and pit stops. And Ericsson just looked cool, calm, and collected. We didn't see much of Ericsson, and that's the greatest thing about the 500 is, if you can just stay out of trouble, find your rhythm, do your thing, you beat 30% of the field, as they say. So Ericsson looked really pretty, and Pato looked aggressive. We were talking in the studio about who was going to be able to take it to Scott Dixon. Now Scott had lost his playmate, and it looked like Pato was the one, because TK couldn't get to the front. He was the other car that looked super aggressive, and sort of Felix Rosenqvist, the two Swedes, were very cool, calm and collected, just biding their time, doing their thing. And it almost worked for them, because there was a time later on in the race where it was Rosenqvist and Ericsson at the front. And that sort of strategy almost worked for them. It certainly worked for Ericsson. So that's, for me, my memory of the race, and just marveling over, after such a strong start, how Will Power struggled, how he went backwards, how he then had that difficult pit stop. It really fell away for Penske. Newgarden couldn't get forward. Then it was Scott McLaughlin who was leading the charge. He had the biggest hit of the month in turn 3 and turn 4. So that fell away. And a lot of the title contenders, they just weren't there. And it's turned with the double points, it's turned the championship on its head going into Detroit this weekend. But yeah, lots of stories. I was sad for Palou, for VK. They're really quick. And the one person I've not mentioned there, and the one person who got the biggest cheer, the Indiana native Connor Daly, who's been such a character throughout the week. And we saw the VT from NBC about the pranks and his hot tub and various different things. He had a really difficult qualifying. The ECR car wasn't where he wanted it to be compared to his teammates, but he found his way to the front with a great bit of strategy and a bit of luck, pitting before that yellow, and he looked good. Once he found his way to the front, he looked really good. He didn't have the armory that, say, Pato had, or maybe TK, but he could stay there and no one could pass him, and he was running the same sort of laps as everyone else. So I was pleased to see it work out for Connor, because he's a really good kid and he does take it seriously, but he does enjoy himself at the same time. He's almost got that Danny Rick style where he can just go from enjoying himself to the consummate professional. But he's super intelligent, Connor, when he's on track, and he's also very polished. Out of all the drivers, if I message the drivers, Connor's the first to get back to you. So he sees the value in being professional, and he might play the fool, but he's very astute, and he knows that if he plays the media, if he's attentive, if he's communicating, if he's doing all of the things off the track that he's doing on the track, he's going to have a successful career, and he does that really well. So I've got a lot of time for Connor personally. So I was pleased to see him up there leading the 500 at one stage.
Absolutely. And it stood out to me as another kind of really important theme that we should touch on is the quality of the safety team that we have in IndyCar. It is fascinating to see how quickly they're able to get to all the incidents, to break them down, to check everything's okay, and to clear the track up as well. It actually, I was going to touch on the Monaco Grand Prix too. It's something people talk about there, the quality of the marshals. But in IndyCar, it's also more like the safety team, the fact, the amount of focus and investment and research they dedicate. And it's needed, right, as well, because the danger levels are higher on those ovals. The speed of the crashes, the G-forces, the impacts are incredible. The drivers can just walk away from these crashes. But in IndyCar, could you explain a little bit about their safety team, their procedure, and kind of everything that goes into it, and why they are world-beating genuinely in their quality?
Yeah, it is needed. We saw or heard from Max Verstappen post Monaco about his comments, not wanting to do the 500. Wow. He doesn't want to risk his life, that kind of thing. But, there is an element of danger. It's a bit like MotoGP. It is dangerous. And when you do get on the super speedways and you are averaging 230 miles an hour, you can't iron out all the risks. And because of that, IndyCar are very aware as to safety and the advances of safety and doing their best. Now, if you look at the safer barriers, if you look at the construction of the tub, everything, Scott McLaughlin's hit there at turn 3 and into turn 4 was just unimaginable. And the fact that he was able to get out of that car is a testimony to the safer barriers and also the safety of the tub. And don't forget, your boat, it gets to a stage where your bones, your spine, everything's got to be able to survive those G forces in different directions. All your organs hit your bones, that kind of stuff. So being able to absorb that impact and look at Colton Herta's crash on carb day. Everyone walked away, and that was really important. But the safety team, what I like about IndyCar is not only are they driving safety forwards, and you can say that's the case with the FIA and Formula One, but it's a permanent team of people, and that continuity and that level of training. I think it was 8 seconds after Colton Herta's crash, they were all on the scene. And you don't always see that in Formula One, depending on which part of the world we're racing in, where we're at, that kind of stuff. And the fact that IndyCar had the same team, and it's not just the doctors or the medical team like we see in Formula One, it's everyone. It's the same people that travel to every single event. And I think that investment to make that a full-time role and have that continuity, that training, that quality control and everything, I think is what makes IndyCar very much ahead of any other series.
And they are really, it's just incredible to see how quickly they can get to the incidents, break down and clear them away, and so well drilled as well. I think, you spoke about how once it becomes a team environment, and also, you spoke about team environment before with Formula One teams, race mechanic teams and broadcast teams too. Once you foster that dynamic of people with a shared goal and they're all motivated and trained and drilled in what they need to do, you start to get really incredible results, and it just beats out other systems, other ways you could do it. The AMR Safety Team does rise to the top. One last thing I did want to touch on, slightly less serious, with Indy 500, or my proposal, right, for next year. So we spoke about what the everything that's gone into the broadcast this year. For next year, what we're going to do, we're going to get the production team on board with this. The golf course inside the 500, me and you versus Zak and Lando, Ryder Cup alternate shot rules. I reckon we can take them down. How do we get that in play? Because I want to play that golf course because it looks fun.
Brickyard Crossing is the name of the course. Yeah, it's awesome, isn't it? They've held proper PGA events there. So it's a proper course. Max Chilton's played it. I've not played it, but it's a long course. It's a difficult course. I think it's hole 10, whereas if you get it wrong, because they come in underneath the speedway,
right,
for 3 holes. So the course is split from the outside of the speedway, and then there's holes inside the speedway as well, because the speedway is just so unbelievably huge. But it's they did a nice little feature, I think, over practice or qualifying on the Brickyard Crossing. Yeah, it's a cool place. And Lando's big on his golf. He's playing at Fox Hills a lot now, so he's working hard in his golf.
I was going to say it. Really good. Sorry, go ahead.
Scott McLaughlin's really good at golf. Yeah,
I was going to say it seems like the Formula One paddock. I know I was trying to look back in F1 history. Apparently Nigel Mansell was a big golfer, but it seems like at the moment all the young drivers we spoke about earlier, like Alex Albon, Charles, not Max, he's too busy sim racing, but Lando, they're all big golfers. Do you think it's just, I don't know. I mean, I started playing golf last year and I love it, but do you think it's just, they like a break? They like something that's so different from the intensity of Formula One. What's the appeal of golf to these drivers? Why do they all love it so much?
There's a group in Surrey, so Max, Chilton, Duncan Tappy, Sam Bird, Lando. There's a whole host of them who play regularly, and I think I blame Duncan Tappy. So any of the young drivers that have sort of grown up with him driver coaching them, he absolutely loves golf. I mean, he's really good. He can go around this sort of 5 or 6 over. But yeah, they're big into it. And Scott McLaughlin as well. I think he played the Brickyard Crossing before the Indy GP earlier on in the month. So he takes his clubs and plays with his engineer and does various different things. But yeah, so there's that sort of huddle of drivers that I've just named that sort of get together and play a lot in the Surrey area.
And I was trying to think, like, because they have that relationship with their race engineer. I wonder if you could extend that to the caddies, right? Because we see the caddies play such an important role in the PGA Tour or the majors. But I was I don't know. I was wondering what the difference is between a caddy in golf and a race engineer. I guess there's got to be some crossover.
Yeah, well, I think they're exactly the same, because the caddies have a really good tech and tack knowledge of the course, and they coach, so that they have that sort of analytical approach in terms of yardage, that kind of thing, club selection. They coach, and that they're an emotional support. All the things that you see in terms of an engineer, they're very, very similar. It's a good analogy.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it. Yeah, they could go together, right? There's a very once you see that positive relationship build between the race engineer. There are some that stand out in Formula One and IndyCar history where you see a driver and an engineer really have a great connection. I think in the context of that, one that comes to mind now is Colton Herta. His race engineer is his dad. I mean, that I think is a fascinating dynamic. And for Colton, do you think it's really important to have that relationship, to have his dad in his ear in the races? Because we know the intensity of the IndyCar races can get to all the drivers, but particularly Colton. What's that dynamic like for him?
Yes, it's always a difficult one. Children and their parents. Maybe it's a bit close to home for a lot of people, but for Colton and his dad Brian, they are so tight, and that you don't get any of that emotion. And I think talking to Max Chilton this weekend and talking to other drivers, IndyCar is all about listening. You've got to trust everyone around you. So it's not just your engineer, it's your strategist, it's your spotter. You've got to trust the people around you, and there's a lot of input that the driver has, and you only get that through experience. It's a bit like World Rally Championship, that kind of stuff, limited testing. You've got to live the situations before you have the experience, and the best way to speed up your learning is to listen. And those drivers that don't listen as well, and then can't put into practice whatever it is that they're trying to digest, are the ones that struggle. So you see drivers that are really quick, that have a wonderful CV, that go to IndyCar and struggle, and then you see drivers that are really on a golden escalator when it comes to soaking up the information and being able to put it into practice. Someone like Marcus Ericsson, somebody that's very good at that. Alex Palou is just brilliant. Scott McLaughlin's been wonderful at soaking up the information and trying to put it into practice. So yeah, the relationship between Colton and Brian is very much that. Colton recognizes that this is somebody, it doesn't matter if it's his dad or not, this is somebody who has an unbelievable wealth of experience, and every driver up and down that grid would love to have Brian in their corner, and Colton's lucky enough to have him. And the relationship that they have and the calmness that they sort of adopt in very, very intense and difficult circumstances is something to marvel over. They do a really good job.
It is really impressive how they're able to keep their cool. And I don't know, I was trying to reflect on, I don't know if I could do it with my dad. I think he'd probably get distracted or start reading the Telegraph halfway through, but you never know.
My stepfather, he played professional cricket, and
oh wow.
And growing up, I loved cricket, but allowing him to coach me when I was 11 years of age, 12, 13 years of age, it was painful. It was just so painful. You just struggle to listen to those nearest and dearest.
Oh yeah, my dad's. I was rugby when I was younger. That was my sport, and my dad was very quick to remind me that he played for I think it was like the Marlow Rugby Club after he finished school, and he played with Matt Dawson there, who obviously went on to play for England. Apparently he was just as good, allegedly, according to my dad.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to see how those family dynamics play out. One thing that came up from our last interview, one thing that people really enjoyed the kind of concept of and your experience across all three events was the Triple Crown of Motorsport. We had Indy 500 in Monaco on last weekend on the same day. We've got Le Mans coming up. I I suppose in the context of Monaco this year, obviously you were very busy on the day, didn't get to see too much of the race. But as a challenge this year, a wet, dry Monaco seems about as hard as they could possibly make it. And for Sergio Perez to win that, it would be the relationships he had with his team, with his engineers, listening all those lessons that probably funneled into that victory, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Monaco's going through a tough time. People are trying to sort of rubbish the magic of Monaco, aren't they? And question whether or not it should be on the calendar and so forth. But certainly for Le Mans and Indianapolis, the magic is still very much there for the majority. I think Le Mans had a difficult time over the last few years as well because of the sort of weight around the regulation changes and the lack of competition at the front of the field. And it's going through a transition, the World Endurance Championship, around those regulation changes. I can't wait for the Le Mans hypercars to be joined by the Le Mans Daytona hybrids. And I think that's going to really bring World Endurance and that whole championship alive again, and the magic of Le Mans will be well and truly alive. And looking back at Group C sort of interest, so I'm looking forward to that. Monaco, it feels like it's struggling a bit, and that's what I think made the Indy 500 really special this year. Is IndyCar's on a crest of a wave. I don't know if you can sense that or if I'm biased, but IndyCar really is moving forward. Roger Penske's doing a great job at the helm. That is the second most watched Indy 500 of all time in terms of tickets sold. For us at Sky, that was the highest watched IndyCar race on record. There's some wonderful drivers in the field, Romain Grosjean going there, and the sponsorship, you can just see the cars are coming alive, the brands are there, the championships going from strength to strength. I think that was reflected in Sunday's event.
And upcoming on the commentary calendar for you, you've got the 24 hours of Spa bike race, right? That's a fascinating storyline, I think, just in world motorsport for bikes to be returning to Spa. It used to be before MotoGP was called MotoGP, right? They did race big bikes there as a part of the circuit, or the premier class of bike racing at the time. But to be returning there, how are you viewing that at the moment? That seems like a cool event and one that's going to be really exciting to be a part of the broadcast team for.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm in the commentary box and not on a motorbike. So racing around Spa is an iconic experience in terms of some of the challenges that the circuit presents. Doing that on a bike is, breathtaking, isn't it? We talked about the dangers of the Indy 500. It's the first time international motorcycle racing's returned there for 2 decades. We did have Grand Prix racing there. We did have the endurance racing there. We've had World Superbikes there. So to have the Endurance World Championship going back there, this is another championship that's on the rise. The manufacturers are really behind it. You've got Honda, Kawasaki, BMW, Ducati. They're all at the front. Yamaha, of course, and they all want to win it. You've got big names in there: Randy DePugna, Robbie Rolfo, Bradley Smith, Louis Rossi, Karel Haneke. Casey Stone has done the Suzuka 8 Hour, Leon Haslam. You've got lots of big names in the championship, and 24 hours around Spa-Francorchamps on a superbike. Now the superbikes are so quick now; they're effectively as quick as when they do the combined testing in the winter, MotoGP and World Superbikes. You see the World Superbikes on the same sort of time. So around the Bugatti circuit, the pole time for the Le Mans 24 hours a month ago for the Endurance World Championship was the same race pace as MotoGP.
Oh, wow.
So that just shows you how quick the superbikes are. So they're going to be really quick this weekend. I hope the weather plays ball, and I'm really looking forward to it. And then I've got Detroit, back to Belle Isle for Sky IndyCar on the Sunday night. So it's going to be a busy weekend.
And that's going to be a pretty special race too for IndyCar, coming off of that wave of popularity. But I did want to ask, just in the context of endurance bike racing, like, how does it work? What's the actual format of it? Because I just don't know. Like, I know endurance, World Endurance Championship, you have driver changes, stints, and fuel changes, tire changes, stuff like that. What's the format of a 24-hour bike race?
So you have 3 riders and the reserve rider. Then they'll just run stints. So they tend not to sort of double stint unless it's wet.
Right.
Where you'll see in car racing that they might even triple, quadruple stint. You'll see people in the car for huge periods of time. You just can't do that on a bike. It's just way too physical. Not saying car racing isn't physical, but you've seen the amount of effort it takes to wrestle a big bike around, the amount of movement that the rider has on the bike, and where you position your weight, and even just sitting up in the braking zones on the back of the Kemmel Straight. You're sitting up using your body as a windbreak. Just the strength that you need to be able to hold yourself on the bike. You just can't do triple stints. And although Terry Reimer, I'm sure, probably done one back in the day, but he can bend metal in half. So yeah, they'll tend to do about an hour on the bike at a time. And the big challenge comes when they fall off, because you haven't got a clue in the night time where they are or where the bike is. So they've got no clue where the bike's gone half the time, because the lights on the bike have been smashed off the fairing or whatever it is. It's pitch black, it's really dark, and they'll sort of stand up. You've got limited lighting on the rider, so you can barely pick out the color of the leathers or who it is. And then because you've got no number to go on, no bike to go on, because they can't even find the bike, never mind the camera, the camera. Yeah. So there's, you just end up with this, individual standing in a gravel trap, looking around as to where's my bike, and whether or not they can get the bike back to the pits and various different things. I mean, they're so brave, and the injuries that they ride with and how they get through the 24 hours, I've got no idea. I've got so much respect for them, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, it's a fascinating event. And I think lastly, I wanted to touch on the next IndyCar race. You mentioned it just before there. What are the, with the context of the championship we have now, we know IndyCar, one of its major selling points is how diverse it is with the tracks. You have oval tracks, traditional tracks, and street tracks. And there's a special prize this year, right, for the driver that wins across all 3. I'll take it. I reckon I could give it a fair go. But in the streets of Detroit, what are the headlines going into that out of the 500? And do you think we're going to see a swing back to the drivers that tend to be better on street tracks when we go to Detroit?
Yeah, I think the big talking point is Chevrolet versus Honda again. So the conversation at the beginning of the year has been how Chevrolet have dominated, and then you've come into the month of May, Honda have turned the tables back a bit with a win at the Grand Prix, and then obviously a third winner in a row at the 500. So it'll be really interesting to see the dynamic, because that really does make a difference. Chevrolet, not only have they brought the horsepower this year, but the drivability of that Chevrolet has been something to marvel over in the opening few races. So for me, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not, the Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing cars have gone well there. They need a change of luck in terms of their performance. Obviously, Team Penske go really well there. So Honda versus Chevrolet, who's going to come out on top of that fight, and then we'll see the order in terms of the teams and where they're at. I mean, Penske, that was a disastrous month of May for them. So they were so strong at the beginning of the year. They definitely need to come back fighting. Andretti Autosport, it's just been a disaster for them all year. It just hasn't gone their way. For Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan, it's not been a strong year. So Lots of question marks. Arrow, McLaren SP, Pato's on the crest of a wave now, having announced his deal. He's much happier. He had a great 500. Can he mount a championship charge? So lots of question marks, lots of unanswered questions. And that's just the nature of IndyCar. You genuinely will be going into Detroit and Bel Air thinking, right, there's 15 drivers that can come out of this weekend with a strong result. So let's see what happens.
Absolutely. It should be a pretty fascinating race, and hopefully lots of returning viewers, right? We've got so many new viewers for the 500. Hopefully people will come back and check out what IndyCar has to offer on a street track. But I think for this week's episode, we can wrap it up there. This has been a really brilliant interview, and I'll say a really big thank you from me, Tom, for coming back on the show and giving us some more insight into the IndyCar world.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And, let's do it again. I enjoy coming back. It's always a nourishing conversation. We cover lots of different topics. So keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been really cool. The show has grown a lot. I'll say personally, the last kind of 3 or 4 months have been really big, and it's been great to get more fans in and to keep making great episodes. So yeah, thanks very much, Tom. We can wrap the episode up there.